Hello and good afternoon, CSI158 Section 844 students. For the second of two courses in the fall 2014 semester at Anne Arundel Community College. I'm actually going to post this up under the spring category. This was a PacketTracer activity that was not demonstrated during the spring 2014 semester, and so I'm circling back to make sure that we get this one done as well. I've had a number of questions this week from students because we're covering this material with respect to not just static routes but floating static routes and how to confirm the administrative distance of static routes when you've made a change. And so let's go ahead and jump in here. So this is a very straightforward activity. It's actually going to walk you through step by step. So the first step is to configure a directly attached static route from Edge router to the internet. The primary default route should be through ISP1, and so it's going to go this route here. This is serial 000 and this is serial 001. So let's go ahead and pull up Edge router, and we'll take a look at the CLI here. We're going to go from user exec into privilege exec. And if I do a show IP route, you can see that right now the gateway of last resort is not set, and therefore any packets that don't have a specific route defined here in the routing table, the destination IP in those packets, if it's not specifically defined here and there's no gateway of last resort, so no default gateway, then what's going to happen is those packets are going to be dropped. You can also see that by default for the Cisco connected routes, it does not give us an administrative distance. However, we know, based off studying, that the administrative distance for a connected route is 0, a static route is going to be 1. And so if I were to do a show IP route and say 10.10.10.0, I can confirm that the administrative distance of that connected route is 0. And so this is where it would show up right here. And this is how we're going to come back and actually take a look at this floating static route that we configure to confirm that the administrative distance is actually 5. Because what you'll notice is when we put static routes in, it may not always show us the administrative distance. So for example, if I were to simply put in IP route, and let's just say to get to the 1.1.1 network, and we're going to send that out, and we'll just say serial 000. So we get the warning that says default route without gateway. It says if not a point-to-point interface may impact performance. But it is a point-to-point interface on the serial 000 interface. But what we wanted to see is if I do a show IP route, you can see that the static route is defined here, right? But nowhere in here does it advertise for us the administrative distance. So if I were to say do show IP route and then 1.1.1.0 for that route, you can see that the administrative distance for a static route by default is 1. And likewise, if I were to reconfigure that, if I do the question mark here, you can see this is where we can put the distance. So if I were to say 254 by updating that route, and then if I ran the do show IP route with the network listed, you'll see that here you go, it changed it right away. So the default administrative, or I shouldn't say default, the administrative distance here is 254 by default. For a static route, again, the administrative distance is going to be 1. And where does this come into play? Well, this is going to come into play with the scenario that we're looking at right now up on the Edge router. I am going to try to find desk scribble here. There's desk scribble. It's going to come into play right here on the Edge router where we have two links. We've got one link here, which is our serial 000, and then we have this link here. So we've got two routes to get out of the network. And so if we want to choose one route over the other, we need to have a difference in the administrative distance. In this case, we're going to be doing that with a floating static route. All right, so let me clear the screen here for us. Okay, so let's go back to the command line on Edge Router. And so it's asking us to configure a directly attached static default route. So for a default route, it's the quad zeros, right? So IP route 0.0.0.0, 0.0.0.0, and we're going to be doing a directly attached route. So we're going to say out the primary interface in this instance, which would be to ISP1. And if I do the question mark, you can see here we could put in a default or a different administrative distance metric. However, we're not going to do that right now. We're just simply going to put in the default route. So now if I do a do show, and actually let's do a do show run, and I want to drop out, we're going to say no IP route 101.1.10 0 serial 000-254. So we'll move that guy out of here. So I'll say do show IP route. All right, so now the gateway of last resort has been set. So if this router now, off of maybe LAN 1 or LAN 2, were to receive packets with destination networks, IP networks that are not known or not defined on the Edge router, what's going to happen is the Edge router is now going to send them out its default route. The gateway of last resort is how that default route is defined, and we can see here that it's going to be going out serial 000. So right now, any traffic that is coming in, any traffic that is coming in, let's get rid of, I want to get rid of that first and then we'll pull this back up. So any traffic coming in from PCA that comes into the router here, and the same thing, PCB, any traffic that comes in, if the router does not have a network route defined for those networks, if it doesn't know about the networks, the destination networks, it's simply going to send that traffic out the default route, and the default route simply says send it out serial 000, and therefore it's going to go to ISP1. And so that's how unknown traffic, right, or traffic that's destined to a network that the Edge router doesn't specifically have defined, that's how the flow of traffic is going to go right now. All right, so let's clear the screen, and we'll go back here to the Edge router. Okay, so what command is used to trace a path from a PC to a destination? And so it's trace RT, and so let's pull up the window here. And so we're going to trace right now from PCA. So if I were to say trace RT, and we're going to go to 198.0.0.10. As you can see, the first hop that we take is the 192.168.10.1, which is our default gateway on our LAN 1 segment. It's the IP address assigned to this interface on the router. So that's our first hop. The next hop is to go to the 10.10.10.1. And so that's going to be out here to ISP1. If I pull up the Edge router and do a do show IP interface brief, you can see that 10.10.10.2 is the actual physical address assigned to the serial 000 interface. So this interface right here is 10.10.10.2, and 10.10.10.1 is the next hop IP. So when we go back to take a look here, you can see that we hit the default gateway on the router, which is this gigabit Ethernet interface. The next hop after hitting the Edge router is going to be here at ISP1, and then we're simply going to go from ISP1 out the internet, and our next hop ends up at the web server. Okay, so we've traced it out to the web server. The route should start at 10.1, it does, go through 10.10.10.1, and it does. It says if not, check your static default route configuration. So keep in mind that the reason that the traffic is flowing out this interface, out the serial 000 interface, is that we have defined a default route, and I know I can't, I'm going to have to go past the, let's see here. So there's the default route there, and then I'm going to pull this back up. So here's the statement that we configured on the router, defining the default route or the gateway of last resort to be the serial 00 interface. And so again, what the edge router is saying is if I receive traffic and I take it in on my interface, I process the layer 2 information, I look at the source MAC, I look at the destination MAC. If the destination MAC is me, the edge router, then I go ahead and I take a peek at the layer 3 information. I look at the source IP and I look at the destination IP. And it's when the router looks at the destination IP that he makes the determination by saying, here's my routing table. Do I have a route to the destination network? If there's no route explicitly defined on the edge router in the routing table, then the edge router is going to say, you know what? I don't have a specific route defined for the destination network that I see in the layer 3 header information. And so what it's going to do at that point, it's going to say, but that's okay because I've been configured so that when this is the case, when I receive traffic destined to a network that I don't have specifically or explicitly defined, I'm just simply going to kind of throw that traffic over the fence and say, hey, whoever you are on the next end, right? Whoever that next hop happens to be out that interface, you're going to have to help me out here and you're going to have to route this traffic for me. And so that's what we've configured here. Again, you can see the S is for static. The asterisk means it's a candidate default route. So again, if I do a do show IP route, and let's do it on 0.0.0.0, you can see it's a static route and the administrative distance is 1. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to go down to the next step. So it says configure a floating static route. So what is the administrative distance of a static route? Well, we just saw that. The administrative distance of a static route is 1. We also confirmed that the administrative distance of a connected route is 0. All right, so configure a directly attached floating static default route. So we're going to configure a new default route, so IP route with quad zeros. And it's going to be directly connected. However, this floating static default route is going to use the directly attached interface serial 001, which would then send the traffic to ISP2. And what I love about the PacketTracer activities is that this is extremely possible at a business, at a small business, where you could have a setup like this. You've got your edge router, maybe this is your Verizon link and this is your Comcast link, right? So you've got both links. You've got a primary link as serial 000 out to Verizon, because maybe that's a Fios connection. And then your backup link is going to be on serial 001. Maybe it's a much slower broadband connection that runs out to Comcast. And so what we're saying here is that as long as this interface is up, and again, you could go far deeper into detection methods, but for the CCNA level, we're going to go ahead and say that as long as this interface is up, that the traffic is going to be sent over this interface as our default gateway, right? Okay, so, and this is going to be our backup interface. And so we're making that configuration change right now where we're going to say we're going to have a floating static. And what that floating means is he's just kind of floating out there waiting for his opportunity to be inserted into the routing table. So let's put the administrative distance of 5 onto the route. So if I do a do show run, what you're going to see now is there are both of our default static default routes. Okay, they're both right here. We have the primary route with an administrative distance of 1, and we have the floating static default route with an administrative distance of 5. And as we know, the lower administrative distance will be the one that gets installed into the RIB, the routing information base, or just the routing table, which we see when we do a do show IP route. So when I do the show IP route, you can see that even though we have 2 static default routes configured, we only have one installed in the routing table. And so this is the one with the lower administrative distance. And again, if I do a do show IP route on 0.0.0.0, you can see that the show IP route, I'm saying show me the information for the route which is currently installed in the routing table for 0.0.0.0, and in this case the distance is 1. Alright, so let's progress here. It says view the running config, verify the floating static default route is there. We've done that, as well as the static default route. So we've seen those. Display the contents of the routing table. Is the floating static route visible in the routing table? It is not, because we can only have one default route in the routing table, and it's going to be the default route that has the lowest administrative distance. And again, the administrative distance here is 1. We configured our floater, our floating static default, with an administrative distance of 5. And so we're going to see that right now. So we're going to test our failover. And again, this is a fantastic activity. If you're in a small office and this is kind of similar to what you might have set up, or if you're looking to set something like this up, here's how we would test the failover. So I'm at the edge router, and I'm going to administratively disable the serial 000 interface. And the way we do that is with the shutdown command. So I'm going to shut this interface down. At that point, the default static route, which we initially configured with an administrative distance of 1, which is the default administrative distance for static route, that route will be removed from the routing table because it's no longer a viable route. So I type shutdown, the interface goes down immediately, and it says verify that the backup route is now in the routing table. So if we do a do show IP route, you can see that right away our floating static route has been installed into the routing table, because we had two default routes, both two default static routes. The one with the lower administrative distance, the lower cost, was inserted into the routing table. The floating static route, again, was just kind of floating out there, right? He was waiting for his chance. So as soon as the interface, our primary path, out serial 000, goes down, that route will be removed from the routing table because it's no longer reachable. And so then the router is smart enough to know, hey, I've got a floating static route over here, and that route is reachable, and so he is now the route that will be installed into the routing table. And so here he is, right? And so we, maybe you drop a couple pings, a couple packets. However, this is something that's going to happen auto-magically without any user intervention when that interface goes down. Okay, so we've got our backup floating static default route is now inserted into the routing table, and you'll notice it doesn't tell us, it just says it's a static. We can't see the administrative distance of that route. However, if I do a do show IP route and we do the quad zeros now, and remember, even though two are configured, this command, which is really show IP route, we have to add the do because we're down to the interface configuration mode. So this show IP route command, this is running against the information that is, or the routes that are currently installed in the routing table. And so right here, there is the proof that that is our floating static route, and his administrative distance is 5. So let's take a look at the next task. So now it wants us to trace from PCA to the web server. So now what we should see when we trace out is that it's not going to go to 10.10.10.1. It's going to go to 10.10.10, and I believe it might be 5 or 6. And there you have it. So it hits the same default gateway, which is right off the LAN 1 interface here on the router, and it then takes its next hop out to ISP2, to the internet, and to the web server. And again, this happens without any intervention from the administrator perspective. All right, so did the backup route work? It certainly did. If not, wait a few more seconds for convergence and then retest. If the backup route's still not working, then chances are you've got a configuration issue. All right, so restore connectivity to the primary route. And so what that means is we're simply going to no shut the serial 000 interface. Now, if I quickly do a do show IP route, you can see that for at least a few, and the phone is ringing, so hold on, we're going to pause real quickly here. Hold on. All right, I apologize there. Some of the, I guess that falls into the life happens category. All right, so we had a phone call, but we're going to drive on here. So did the backup route work? It certainly did, and what we were doing was in the process of running the show IP route, and as you can see, as soon as the line protocol on the interface changed its state to up, the administrative distance changed, and the reason for the change, you can see it went from 5 to the interface coming up and us running the show IP route command to 1, was that the router has now taken a look at the routes in the routing table, and it knows, do show IP route, and it knows that it has a default static route with a lower administrative distance than the one that was installed. And so as soon as the serial 001 interface came online, it removed the route that was less attractive to the router because of the administrative distance and has now reinstalled our original default route. And so again, as you can see, when we were doing the show IP route, traffic would be transiting out the other interface, the serial 001. So chances are you're probably going to drop a few packets, maybe a session would be interrupted. However, you're going to come back up on that serial 00 interface, which we said would be your Verizon connection. And now we're going to trace the route one last time from PCA. And as you would expect, we're going to see that it's going to hit the 10, 10, 10, 1 again. And so now it's back to using the original path. All right, so this completes the activity for PacketTracer 6.4.3.4, where we're configuring a floating static route. And so hopefully you've got a better understanding of not only the purpose of the floating static route, but when you might want to realistically use the floating static route. And if you're not in a massive environment and your company's not doing any kind of a BGP pairing with like a massive service provider, and again, maybe small to medium business where you've got a Cisco router and you've got some LAN segments behind it, if you've got 2 internet connections, this is a great way to use one of those paths as a primary, and then who knows, maybe in the middle of the night, people are still working, 3 in the morning, and that primary link goes down for whatever reason, it's automatically going to fail over, and it's going to start using the secondary ISP. And this is without your intervention, without the administrator intervention. All right, so that wraps up this activity. Thanks for watching, and have a great weekend.